Recording started.
Welcome, everybody, this week to the Matrexit discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. And tonight's going to be a little bit of a change up on this episode. This is episode number 333. So we've been doing this every week for quite a while now, and we've covered a lot of different topics. And that's what I'm going to get into a little bit in the second half of this. But I'm just going to briefly do a little bit of a wind up on the previous two episodes that we've done regarding mystery schools. And one of the things I think people need to realize, and also, like I say every week, this wonderful Sunday, first day of the week, not the 7th, not the Sabbath, it really shows us right there even, the Sunday issue, how a lot of these teachings from the mystery schools have seeped into society and changed a lot of things. Even scripture makes a statement about the changing of times and seasons. That's a perfect example of it right there. And we may see a lot of things like that happen, in our regular life and on the surface level of things, but we really don't know what lays in the background. What has caused some of these different issues to take place, such as the recognition of Sunday. And I think it's very likely that we may even see things in the future make another change regarding Sundays. Different types of mandates that occur. I believe people have talked about like the Sunday blue laws, things like that regarding businesses, which I know when I grew up, there was a lot of people that I grew up around that wouldn't even go to a business on Sundays. Didn't matter, opened or not, whatever. They felt if people just didn't go to them, then they wouldn't even stay open on Sunday. And the people would get those days off. And even people that are adherent observers of Sunday make sure, and as the scripture said in the Old Testament, that you need to make plans for Sunday, which means scripturally it was make sure you have your food prepared so you don't have to do any of that type of work. In today's terms, that would mean, hey, if you've got an eighth of a tank of gas on Saturday, in order to get back and forth, if you're going to go to a worship service or something, you might want to go and fill up the gas tank, put some more gas in it. That way, you aren't going to a business and operating in commerce on that day. But I think, commerce has even snuck into people's lives in ways that they don't even notice because it just becomes part of life, such as maybe tithing. How many people nowadays, I noticed on different websites this past week, looking at a couple different churches, that, they were supplying an app that you could use to pay your tithe online. Well, how many people are using that on Sunday, the supposed holy day, and operating in commerce that way, even though they're just clicking a couple buttons? There's not a lot of work involved. And technically, if we look at it, what really is the Sabbath? Sabbath, that word, if you go back into the Hebrew, it means a couple different things. Not just the seventh, that's what most people think of, Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, which the way our calendars look nowadays would be Saturday and not Sunday. And so maybe the Seventh-day Adventists are onto something there. Who knows? Personally, I think that the calendars that mankind uses today have been grossly misconstrued to show us things that aren't necessarily so. Because scripturally, if you're going to go back, for instance, and look at first chapter of Genesis, second chapter of Genesis, look at how things were developed, you would see that the moon was created on the fourth day. the great light for the day and the great light for the night, the moon and sun. Those were created on the fourth day. And so, to me, anyway, that would mean the Sabbath would come 3 days after the new moon. And the moon cycles are not laid out exactly the way our calendars are laid out. Religions have had more influence over our daily lives than people even realize. Even, I think, atheists don't even really stop and think of how much they do that is actually based on some form of religion or another. Because today's societies really follow more of a solar calendar than the moon calendar. The word month actually supposedly comes from the word moon. So if it was following the moon cycles, the calendars would look much, much different than they currently do. And your so-called Sabbath wouldn't necessarily land on the same day of the week all the time. I challenge you, pull out a calendar and look at the moon cycles and look at maybe potentially that third day as actually being the seventh day. Because that changes a lot of things. So I think these mystery schools have really founded a lot of the beliefs that a lot of today's current religions teach from, whether they realize it or not. And I think there comes a point when a lot of, say, pastors or priests, clergy, whatever you want to call them, I think any of those people that after a while that they've got to notice that something is wrong. If they didn't notice it, say in seminary or in college, at some point during their career as a minister, they have to realize that something isn't quite right because things aren't set up the way everybody thinks it is. And I've known of people that were approved, say, for instance, to become a pastor for particular denominations, and they went to the leaders of their denomination and said, hey, there's certain things that I'm finding that are taught and everybody follows that aren't quite scriptural. Maybe specifically looking at things in the AD 300s that were technically pagan, but seeped their way into the different religions. Say, for instance, people celebrating Easter, or even people celebrating the birthday of their Savior on the 25th of December, which is a day that other gods were also using. So that was nothing new. And they would go to these heads of their church and say, why aren't these things really shown? Why aren't we showing the whole truth? Because people today have a lot more access to knowledge than people would have had even 20 or 30 years ago. At that time, over the centuries, you had to do a lot of digging. You had to read a lot of books to find info, where today we can find things at the tip of our finger. But we also have to comprehend that a lot of these things that we find at the tip of our finger or our thumb aren't necessarily true. And I'm going to get into that in the second half tonight, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the group Tactical Sovereignty on Facebook and the direction I'm kind of planning on moving with it. But a lot of these teachers, and I recommend people to go out and study, say, for instance, Rudolf Steiner, Helen Blavatsky, and study a lot of these people that were teaching these things really not that long ago. And the things they were teaching were things that all seeped out of the mystery schools. And these mystery schools all really originated in the Babylon area, the Egypt area, in the Middle East, as I've given examples of the past couple of weeks. There's a lot of these little organizations that existed, around, 1000 BC, and even up through, the first few centuries AD, that people really aren't taught a lot about, but have had a great influence on today's religion and today's societies. And so many of these things that have been done in the past, I think, are being done today and being done way more obvious than we realize, although people that you could say, air quotes, that are in the know recognize, because these all fall under the different types and shadows, is what they'd be referred to in the military. Types and shadows. They're easily recognized by a lot of these people. I heard a conversation actually today somebody was having at a place I was visiting, and they were talking about like the 12 or 13 bloodlines, and all that kind of talk we hear. But it's not even just the 12 or 13 bloodlines. There's people on the fringes of those bloodlines. These people all run together. They all hang out together, celebrate things together. They're part of each other's life, whether it's in business or just out of family friendships. And so many of those people, and a lot of them may be people that, I mean, you're going to see them on TV. You may even run into them in your regular life. But these are people that people need to realize that, they may not go to church where you go to church at, their children may not go to school with your children. They have their own schools. I believe I brought that up last week. There's so many of these private schools out there, which myself, I went to a private school, and I'm very, very thankful that I did, because I didn't get as much of the federally mandated indoctrination that you get in the public schools. And I was able to look at things through a little bit different lens. But a lot of these other schools, um, like say maybe the Montessori schools or the Steiner schools, a lot of these schools, they're teaching their fundamental beliefs that lay behind what they're teaching came from these schools. And so a lot of these people that are maybe controlling things today, they recognize these signs and symbols. It stands right out to them. It's obvious to them. They're not going to talk about it. I would say one of the main reasons they're not going to bring these things up is because a lot of people probably look at them like they're crazy, because, the average, Joe Sixpack out there hasn't had this perspective. It hasn't been taught these things. But there's little things that will seep through from time to time that should be an alert to us that there's things going on that aren't necessarily in the limelight, or things that are a part of our common thought or our common speech. And like I mentioned, discussion that was online or on TV with Judge Napolitano, where he saw Trump and he said, "Well, he can't be president because he's not initiated. He's not part of some of these organizations." And that really should have been a heads up to a lot of people, and said, "Whoa, what's he talking about? What are these people involved with? What are a lot of these different things?" And I don't just point at, say, for instance, Masons, although that's the first thing that's going to jump to people's mind, but a lot of these teachings that really come out of, I would say, these Jesuit schools, all your Ivy League colleges, these are all the Ivy League colleges are all Jesuit based. And at the core, I think people are so ill-informed or misinformed, even regarding their teachings, because they're immediately going to think evil and, these are the dark overlords and things like that. But at the beginning, that really wasn't the mission, for instance, of the Jesuits. It was called the Society of Jesus. It was called that for a reason. And if you go and I'm reading the book by Ignatius, who founded them. and some of the things that he was talking about. And I mean, he gets deep spiritually onto every level of life, and his writings are just amazing. I think it's something that everybody should read and study. But where they've ended up at today didn't start with what his intent was, and everything is about intent. But what happens, unfortunately, is these dark forces, these dark energies, have a way of creeping in to any organization and twisting it and turning it. Maybe not hugely visible at first, but they'll just tweak little things here and there to start putting in the influences of their belief system. And unfortunately, people don't realize it until it's way, way too late. A lot of people today look at the Patriot movement. So many people, are like in love with their founding fathers or Thomas Jefferson, whatever the case may be. But I firmly believe, absolutely, in fact, I'm positive, that if a lot of those founders went and looked at where society is today and the influence that the different governments or even the states have with the people, that they necessarily would not like it. This necessarily may not have been quite what their vision was. Now, that, of course, could depend on whether they were a Federalist or anti-Federalist. I believe the Federalist, hey, they may love it. I think they wanted the big government. They wanted, um, Big Daddy out there. But the majority of them really didn't, and that was at the core of the foundation of the United States of America, was to get away from that kind of authoritative power. And so I really don't believe that what you see today was their total vision. But that happens with a lot of different organizations. You look at where they are today as compared to their grassroots, where they started out at. Say, for instance, like the John Birch Society. If the John Birch Society today was saying the things that they were saying when they were originally founded, they wouldn't exist. They'd be shut down. They wouldn't be allowed to have any kind of public limelight, as little as the one that they do have, even. Because what happens? The people with other ideas creep in, with their own values, and they kind of start slowly tweaking and morphing things into something else, so that years later, you're really not looking at the same organization. This happens with everything. And I would say this is also what's happened probably with a lot of the man-made religions today. Granted, I'm not a fan of man-made religions. I don't believe, if Jesus actually did walk the earth, he wasn't spouting anything about, you have to join the synagogue, or you have to be part of this church or that church and not this one or the other one. He wasn't part of anything put together by man. And in fact, he was an extraterrestrial. He even told everybody he was an extraterrestrial. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world." But what man has done is tried to take spirituality and make it a part of this world when it's really not. And these people at maybe, say, the mystery school level, or people that are in a lot of positions of power, they fully comprehend that. If we go back and look at things that happen, say, for instance, with like the Majestic 12 and the Collins Elite, there was a core of people in that limited access program that knew that they were playing with powers that they shouldn't be playing with. And they walked away from it. And they even called them out and said, "This is wrong." But guess what? Those people didn't get a voice. But even at that time, governments were starting to try and play with these extra powers, these what they called, ultra spiritual or ultra terrestrial powers. And you can go back even scripturally and look back at Saul and Solomon. This isn't anything new. The governments have been trying to do this for a very long time, but I would say that the one thing that has happened is they've gotten better and better at it. And it's become part of our regular life. Well, whether we've seen it, or we don't see it, it's there. Once you have the eyes to see it and you recognize these types and shadows, things become extremely obvious to you. If you look at a writing, it's called Profiles of the Future by Arthur C. Clarke. This was done, a long time ago. What are we looking at? 60, about 60 years ago exactly. This is in 1962. Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That's not like a gray area. It's definitely not black and white. He's saying it's indistinguishable. In the future, you won't be able to tell the difference between what's magic and what is just technology. And I think technology has been one of the tools that they've found that they can easily usher this into people's life. Slide it right in under the door without anybody even recognizing it. Because that's how everything is always done. It's incrementally done. I remember growing up in the 80s listening to Ronald Reagan talk. And Ronald Reagan, at that time even, they were talking about a nationally mandated healthcare system. And this wasn't something new that started with Obama or anything like that, or with Hillary Clinton. No, this has been attempted many times. Even Ronald Reagan said, point blank, he said, it's like a camel. He said, if you let the camel's nose under the flap of your tent, the next thing you know, the whole camel is in your tent. And that's a perfect example of how they just trickle things in little by little. And next thing you know, it's just a part of life. And you can't really easily put a finger on exactly when something happened or how it was all done, because it's just done incrementally, little by little. And then all of a sudden, bang, guess what? The wolf is now running the hen house. I recommend to people as well. I know not all YouTube producers do it, but I try and make it a practice of throwing things down in the show notes below, down in the description box, where you can get access to more info. Because I know when I first started reaching out into learning really what's going on, and I guess, we're going to get into the second portion now of tonight's talk about the Facebook group that I started, Tactical Sovereignty. And when I started doing this, one of the things that I found that was absolutely necessary was providing links. Where did this info come from? Is this something you dreamed up out of your head? Is there any foundational truth to this, And so when I would maybe listening to something on YouTube or even something that you read online, I'm going and looking, okay, are these people with an organization or a foundation or something? If so, try and get into that, learn more and more about it, so you can kind of wrap your head better around the information they were saying, or find things that will expound more on that information. So like I said, I always try to drop stuff down in the description box below that will reference some of the things I talk about and where you can go to find out more about these topics or issues. I list the Facebook group in there. I'll try and list several things if I can relating to what the particular YouTube was about. I've got a link on there to our group's WordPress site as well. And people can go there and find more things out, because I know when I first started researching, it was tough to find things. And this was a few years ago. And I would say the past 2 or 3 years, it's become even more difficult because I know in the beginning, like say for instance, go to the great oracle Google. Okay, I would have to maybe go down 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 pages down before I was really finding what I was looking for on a topic. Nowadays, it seems like to me anyway, it seems like after the second, third page, they start just regurgitating the same information back to you again that was previously listed. And at the same time, I think this movement of pushing out false information and you know censoring things, I find that really interesting because I find things online on Google that number one I wouldn't have found a few years ago, and the things that I'm finding are extremely wrong, extremely false. And I'll go to it and I'll just start reading, and I'll get several sentences or maybe a paragraph in, and all of a sudden I realize who it was that wrote this because I've just seen so much info that it's typically pretty easy to spot, or even be able to spot, what school of thought that these writings are coming from, and quickly identify that this is false information. And so I find it fascinating that in this day and age of censoring things because they claim that it's false information, that at the same time that they're propagating false information and things that would just totally confuse people or head them off totally in the wrong direction. Although at first sight, for somebody that hasn't researched or studied or learned, it's going to look very valid. And to me, some of it's very impressive as to how valid it looks. But at the same time, when you know how wrong it is, it's like, gosh, how does this stuff seep through? Is it because maybe it's not real people in the background that are doing the censoring? Is it their AI or the algorithms that's letting it get through because it looks like it's so legitimate? When I first started out, the group Tactical Sovereignty, it was really just a way of storing things. I was brand new to computer and hadn't used this stuff before. My girlfriend was saying, "Hey, you got to get this new phone." At the time, if people are old enough and remember back, I had the old flip phone, the old Razor flip phone. And I was like, "No, I'm fine. This does everything I need." "Oh, no, no." She said, "Hey, you got to get this new phone. It's like having a computer right in your hand." And she was exactly correct. And, I absolutely was not going to use that. I was staying with the technology that I had and refused to get one. So anyway, after she had made me get one, I started reading things and finding more and more info out. It was like I was finding more things than I really had the time to sit and read through. I mean, I might find a PDF that was, 400, 500, 600 pages long. Well, I'm not going to immediately just sit and read through that. So what do I do with it? And I was like, well, I could share it to myself on Facebook, share it to do the only me thing. And I saw that there was another option there, and that was to start out a Facebook group. You could share it in a group. And so I did a group. It started out as being what's called a secret group, right? Which pretty much would only be me and anybody I gave a link for it to. And a few of the people that I was showing the information to, they're like, "Gosh, Brian, you gotta open this up. You gotta make it a public group." And I looked into that and I was like, I don't really want to do that because people can throw all sorts of just crap in there. You know what I mean? And so I decided to go with a private or a closed group. That way there would be some monitoring to the things that would get posted there. Because, I mean, if you don't do that, you're going to have people posting porn, believe me, all sorts of garbage in there. And at the same time, then there was also people saying, "Oh," in the background, I'd hear people say, "Oh, Brian's promoting this, Brian's promoting that." Well, just because it's posted in the group, I want people to know, does not mean it's 100% legit info. Even if I posted it to the group, doesn't mean it's 100% legitimate, truthful information. It might be just something that I threw into the group for me to go and look at later on and check out later on. And then in the future, depending on what the information was, I might even delete it and get rid of it, just so it wouldn't be maybe a stumbling block for other people. And I've even found myself recently deleting things back from the original group, Tactical Sovereignty. And that group, the original group, I did have it archived for a while, but the past several months it's been opened back up for everybody again. And it's got, I don't know, 11, 12,000 members in it. But I archived it because it seemed like that group, every time it started hitting close to like 13,000 or above, I was having problems, it seemed like, with Facebook. And if people remember the time that my home was burned a couple years ago, that night, actually 20% of the membership was deleted from that group as well, which I found the timing of that to be kind of curious, which we were right at the cusp of 13,000. And it dropped the numbers down to, I believe, just below 11,000. And it's like, wow, this is strange. So I decided to archive it and start up a second group by the same name. If you see the original group, the banner on that has kind of a purple background with the ship and a lightning bolt. So that'd be the original one. One of the things I think people need to realize when they're looking into things that are presented to them is, number one, especially if it's something in a legal format, something that comes from courts or things like that, if you don't have any training or education in law, then you need to be very careful with what you're seeing. A lot of times things are shared that are completely inaccurate, especially, for instance, like things that are shared by AI, supposedly, artificial intelligence. I've seen things shared from even AI that the AI itself will cite various court cases to back up what the AI is trying to claim that its stance is, or what the viewpoint is on one topic or another. But if you go and look up those court cases, number one, sometimes those cases don't even exist. There never was such a case, or the case is about something completely different than what is being touted. So you had to be very, very careful of that kind of stuff. And at the same time, a lot of people don't realize this, but I was afforded the ability to go to paralegal school. And when I was approached on the topic, it took me all of about 2 seconds to make up my mind whether I wanted to do it or not. It was an absolute yes. And the reason why is because it's good to know what's really going on within the system, how the system is laid out. If there is, say, a pending court situation happening, how would you approach it? What things get filed first? How do you find information regarding the case, or what the other party is going to be using either for or against you? What is the steps? What is the process for a court case? It's easy to jump on YouTube and see a lot of people that are, for instance, at their arraignment, and most judges do it today. They tell people flat out, this is just the arraignment. This is not the time to argue your case. This is not the time to tell us what happened. That will come later on. But though the people still feel that they need to explain their side, but that's not what the arraignment is for. So I thought, absolutely, very important to be able to make use of taking a paralegal class. And at the same time, I would say it's also good to know who it is that's providing this class for you. Because I thought many times in the past about just going to a local university and signing up and taking a paralegal class and just to kind of learn those basic steps and things like that. But at the same time, I was like, a regular state run university or college is not really going to give you the real behind the scenes meat that you want. And so the class that was presented to me is a class that has people involved in it that are either retired or present day attorneys that have worked both in the federal and the state level arena. And they wanted to come out and really show people how things work, because their goal and their purpose was that people don't comprehend the system and they don't know a lot of the little dirty tricks, however, may be legal, but the little dirty tricks that different prosecutors or the state or attorneys might try and use against an opposing party. And they wanted people to be able to start learning those things and being able to recognize them when they occur. And so they know what abilities you really do have if you're faced with a situation like that. So absolutely, I jumped on that. And, in that same line of thought, when I first started the group as well, it wasn't because I was facing any kind of court case. I didn't have anything pending, which was very fortunate because I see a lot of people who started out with having pending things happening in their life. And so when they did try to start learning, they were looking at things through a particular lens. I see this all the time. I see it today with even people that have become really popular. But I know in the background what their situation is. I know the lens that they're looking for and what they're trying to accomplish. But when you're looking at things with a limited perspective like that, you're not going to see the big picture. And so even some of these people, when I try and show them things, that they won't pay attention to it because it's part of the bigger picture. It's not something that's going to help them in their individual situation. At least they don't think it will. But we have to be able to see the big picture to realize what you're facing. If you're, for instance, think of being blindfolded and then put 10 feet in front of a building. Take the blindfold off, you look at the building, you're not going to know about that building, but everything you know is just going to be what you immediately see. And you're going to be very limited. You've got to be able to take a few steps back, maybe walk around the building. Tesla would walk around a building 3 times before you'd go in it, But you've got to be able to wrap your mind around the whole situation in order to know how to tackle the problem. And so, fortunately for me, I didn't have anything pending like that, still don't. And so I was able to really look at things from the bigger picture, and I quickly figured out that, I was seeing some of the main rabbit holes that people immediately go down because of their pending issues. The biggest one would probably be like taxes. Taxes is a huge one. The second might be the whole driving versus traveling issue. That's a very popular one. And so, like I said, since I didn't have anything pending, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to start looking at these things one by one and study it until I felt that I'd really had my head wrapped around it very well and would be able to figure things out more in the future when I saw it, because I had studied it more in depth. And when I say I started going and studying, I know most people don't have the ability to, the way their life is organized, they can't do it. But fortunately, I've been blessed to a point where I didn't have to work 70 hours a week. I could work a limited schedule. and I wasn't raising offspring. And so from the time I got up in the morning until I went to bed, yeah, I've often said either I was at my job or I was sleeping. Any of the other time, I would say 95% of it was dedicated to study and research. And when I say study and research, I hear other people talk about it and discuss it, and it seems like their study and research boils down to maybe watching a couple YouTubes and a few Tic Tacs and pulling up a couple blurbs that are listed online. That's not what I was doing. In fact, their time is even involved with having the television probably running 24/7 in their house. I got rid of the television altogether. Zip. Haven't turned on one since. I spent my time digging in, going in, buying the books, buying the fundamental educational material that you had to know on those topics, especially even buying books that were no longer in print, books that were specifically not in print for a reason, because they held some of this information that they really didn't want to be in the eyes of the general public, which, anymore, I think the statement is very true that if you want to hide something, the best place to do it is to put it in a book because people just don't read anymore. I've had a couple of people ask me to, they're like, Brian, you ought to write a book. And that's part of the reason why I started doing these YouTubes. This started out primarily for the group because people were asking a lot of questions, and they still are. There's a lot of Q&A that goes back and forth in the comments in Tactical Sovereignty. And I felt it'd be better to do a YouTube where the members could get together, they could talk to each other, meet each other, talk about whatever topics, were on their mind at the time or whatever issues maybe they were facing. But unfortunately, it seems like, I don't know, stage fright, what it is, but people rarely want to come on and interact with each other. I find that kind of curious. And I see some YouTube channels where they'll have maybe a panel of 5 or 6 people on, and what normally ends up happening is 1 or 2 people dominate the entire call, whether, I don't know if they want to impress everybody else with how much they think they know, or that they're just regular chatty Cathys. I'm kind of glad that I was not gifted with the gift of blab, because that's not the way I am. I'm typically pretty quiet. So it just seemed like that wasn't the direction that this group wanted to take with this YouTube channel. So, I started bringing on guests and started going through some of these specific issues that people face. And I've had some excellent guests also that came on. Those actually make things easier for me. They kind of free up the call for me. And at the same time, I guess it's kind of selfish, but it gives me a chance to learn myself and to listen to somebody else, especially when you have them there firsthand. Some of the people that we've had on, Clint Richardson has been on a couple times. I highly recommend him to people. Mr. Scotty Roberts has been with us several times. I recommend Scotty Roberts with his knowledge, especially his research on ancient history. Dr. Joy Pugh. Dr. Joy Pugh's been on. We actually had to do a 2-parter with her because halfway through our first interview, I said a name that the algorithms didn't like, and the whole thing immediately got taken down. And so we had to come back 10 or 15 minutes later and start a part 2. I found that was kind of curious. Trial Hera has been on a time or 2. People always enjoy her. Kurt Kallenbach's been on a couple times. We were very, I think, blessed. And I know a lot of people have different opinions, but we're very blessed to have Jordan Maxwell on before he passed away. One of my favorites is Walter Burian has been here with us. Walter Burian is a gentleman that kind of exposed the CAFR accounts, which is CAFR, which stands for the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It's now been changed. I think they did it just to kind of hide things a little bit, but it's no longer CAFR. It's now ACFR. And he kind of exposed a second set of books. These accounts are the second set of books that not just the government keeps now, but a lot of businesses keep them as well. And a lot of the different agencies, government agencies, use them as well. I believe, if I remember correctly, according to him, that knowledge was actually gained not organically by the government, but was gained from the arrest of Al Capone and his financial secretary, who was an attorney named Edward O'Hare. If that sounds familiar, it's because probably of O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And I believe, according to him, that's where the government learned how to run this second set of books. We've had attorney Tina Foster on with us. That was a fun conversation. We've recently had Trey Smith from God in a Nutshell has been here. R. Wayne Steiger has been on. I recommend people listening to him. He really gets into some of the esoteric as well and brings out a lot of these teachings that you don't hear talked about, but they seem so familiar. And the reason why they sound so familiar is because a lot of them have become part of our regular life. So I recommend those people, and we've covered a lot of different topics as well on these calls. Like I said, this is episode 333 that we've done on Talkshoe, and I've recently been putting them on YouTube. Our thumbnail for tonight was actually from when we first started prior to Talkshoe. For a few months, we were just doing lives on YouTube, and that's where this banner came from that you'll see on the thumbnail. I mean, we've covered a lot of different topics. I mean, of course, status correction is always really popular with people. We've covered that quite a bit. Did that in a video called Correcting the Presumption of Status, because that's really how I have found it to be. It's not a matter of actually changing your status. You're changing the presumption. You've always held the right status, but they presume that your status is something else, and it's not something that is very advantageous to you. And speaking of which, along those lines, well, I won't mention his name. There's some good teachers out there. So we covered on that, like the birth certificate authentication and the steps for that. And that's also on WordPress. I did that specifically because when I was studying and researching that probably consumed a good 6 months solid of research. Because I did a web search for anywhere online the term birth certificate or certificate of live birth was used. Anything I could find, I was reading it to fully comprehend what was going on there, which quickly brought the realization that that document is nothing but the creation of the legal fiction or the legal person. The difference between the upper and lowercase u and the all uppercase u that you see on documents. So I laid out the steps for that, and that's on WordPress. We've covered adverse possession, and I'm not talking about being a squatter. I'm talking about legally being able to move into a home for very, very little money and have it become your own, because that is something that's real, and it's something that's done out there. A lot of these people that do the house flipping, a lot of them are going to tell you about this, but this is a little bit similar to what they're doing. This is, in a way, how they find a lot of the homes that they find. I've had people on, we've talked about watering systems and the type of water you drink, and how you can a little more easily access, I guess you could call it the cache water system, but it's a cache method, I would say. It's not the label cache, but just that's kind of the same method that's used with cache. Which, if people want to look that up, that's KESHE. Lots of stuff about that online. With all these topics that have been covered, with all of these calls, I think it's been a good help to a lot of people. And I know there's some people out there that, are strictly just like, into, call it maybe the entertainment of learning, maybe more entertainment than learning. And so they enjoy just kind of listening. But we have to realize that a lot of the stuff that's put out there, especially when you hear like real popular voices, for instance, like say David Icke, okay, these voices that are popular out there are popular because they're allowed to be popular. I mean, that's how Billy Graham got started. Billy Graham didn't get started because he was a great preacher. No, he got started because the right man heard him and made him popular, started putting him on the front page of his newspapers. That's how these things happen. They really don't happen organically. Things that happen organically really aren't going to take off um, without a little bit of help from dirty old Uncle Sam. That's just the way it is. I'd say a lot of the information that you find when you're doing some maybe the research that I started out doing, but what I was looking for was what is the connection between us and the state, between you and dirty old Uncle Sam? What's the connection there? And there was the day, maybe if you go back to the Book of Law Nations, where it was just because you were born here. But in developing governments, people quickly learned that, well, you can't necessarily use that. Because what if someone is just born here because they're on vacation with mom and dad from another country? And that really, you can't pin a citizenship just because of that. Or maybe they're born on a ship that belongs to a particular country. You can't pin that country's nationality or citizenship on them just because of the boat they were born on. So over time, a lot of details get written into the laws on these things. And so, it's good to realize and see this change that has happened with these governmental systems and how they've evolved over time as people have evolved as well. Law used to be written with two L's, LLAW. And that's because it was showing you that it was a living thing. And the two L's were to resemble the two legs of a man, always moving. And the law moves as well. And it has to, as customs change, as people change, and as certain societies either grow or fade away, things have to change. That the common law of those people can't stay the same because, archaic laws of 100 years ago wouldn't be useful today because it's not the type of experiences people go through. And on the surface level, a lot of these things that people are taught, and I have admitted to people and admittedly gotten a lot of info from Jesuit teachers. And that, just because it's them doesn't make it bad, doesn't make what they have to say wrong. But at the same time, I think that's where a lot of the information people hear is coming from. It's coming from those sources. But even within these sources, they aren't black and white. It's just like, when people talk about the deep state, okay, or shadow government, which are two totally separate things, but a lot of people think of them as being the same. Or people might want to label something as being deep state without realizing that the deep state is just as separate and fragmented as society is today. Is that there's good and bad even within them, and there's factions within them that argue against each other. I think an excellent example of that would be Donald Trump. Donald Trump is deep state. I tell people that a lot of people fight against, somebody saying that because they may think he's, one of the good guys and that deep state's bad. So they don't want to hear that. But I think that's Donald Trump is an excellent example because that depicts a couple different factions of the deep state right there. There's a faction of the deep state that wants to take over the world. And then there's a faction of the deep state that may say, well, yeah, eventually that may be a thing, but right now we need to strengthen the United States of America. We've got to be strong before we can ever even think about going and ruling the world, for instance. And I would say that was the level Donald Trump was on. He wanted to solidify the United States of America. Personally, I think his reasoning for doing it was based selfishly because where are all his corporations? His corporations are founded here in the USA. And if the USA is not strong, then the people are not going to be strong and wealthy. And that means then that his corporations aren't going to grow and be strong or wealthy either. So he had a direct incentive for wanting to strengthen the USA. And it wasn't because he was just a flag waving patriot. He has donated a lot of money and time to the Democratic Party, just as he did as being a Republican president. People need to realize these things. And so, looking at the information that you're provided and that we see on the surface level, one, I really recommend trying to see where it's coming from. Okay. That way, if there's a different motive behind this being put out and whether it's good info or bad info. There's people that are benevolent in what they're putting out, and because they're well-meaning, they want to be helpful, and that's why the information is being presented out there. That's why I put things out there. Well, on the flip side, there's also those that are going to put things out there, people who are malevolent, which means they've got a malicious intent. Not because they want to help anybody or they feel the need for people to really learn, but they want to steer people in the wrong direction. I would say in the legal realm, that's an absolute great reason for bad information being put out there. Because if you're going to enter into court or even just live your life based on bad information, and guess what? That's going to be very, very profitable to the court system because that is an adversarial system. It needs the general public to be on an opposing side. That's how they make money. If everybody is in agreement and harmony, that's not going to be beneficial for any court system. So I think people need to pay close attention to that. Pay attention to those types and shadows that you're going to see presented with info that's put out. Something might come from a website that has a great name and sounds really patriotic, but it may be full of some of the absolute worst possible information out there that can be spread. And then there's some people that are just spreading things because it's maybe a popular topic and they're trying to get popular, or they want to make their YouTube channel popular. That might be one of their single income sources, might be their channel. For me, this channel is not monetized. I don't know if YouTube throws commercials on it. They probably do, but believe me, none of that comes to me. I have not gone and signed the contract with them where you've got to give them like the bank account number, you've got to give them like an EIN or a social number or something like that, and in contract with them. No, and that's a big reason for me not to do it. So if you do see commercials on here, believe me, it's not doing anything for me. What I've put out has really been just beneficial for anybody that's interested in these topics, like I said, that's why the group was started. Anybody that wanted to follow along, the original group was Tactical Sovereignty in My Journey. That way people could kind of follow me in my journey, see the different things I was looking at, seeing what I was doing with the information that I found, what stuff was actionable information, and what stuff is just kind of fluff, interesting, fun stuff that you really can't do anything with. It's not going to hold up anywhere. Um, who cares if Hillary Clinton was switched out with a clone or if Obama was switched out with a clone? Okay, big deal. What do you do with that? It doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't change anything in your life. You can't found anything on that. And this being call number 333, I think this maybe is a good time maybe change up things a little. And as I've said, we've done this once a week. I think we might have started on Mondays and then switched to Sundays, but we've done it once a week, very, very steady for all this time. And at the same time, I see a lot of people will comment. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting, or I keep missing. When did you say you do your calls? When's the podcast?" And I just kind of laugh. It's like it's been Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern, forever. It seems like, you know. And I think people pay attention to what's important to them. Really, is what it comes down to. Yeah. So it's probably not all that important to them. That's fine. But at the same time, I think it might be a good reason to change things up at this point. Uh, as I've said, I've talked a lot about. I think this. And I don't like using the word simulation because everybody's got their viewpoint on what a simulation is. And when I heard people talking about, that the society is nothing but a simulation. We're like in a game. I didn't agree with it. But I finally, kind of morphed my personal definition and viewpoint of what a simulation is. And I would agree now, yes, this is a simulation. And in a simulation, there's certain things that are dependent on. And, consistency is one of them. And I've recommended people to be very inconsistent in their life, which means don't drive the same pattern to work all the time. Don't drive the same pattern home all the time. Switch things around. Switch around basic things in your life. Switch around what you do for entertainment and the places you frequent. Don't become that creature of habit because that's what assimilation depends on. And I think the Sunday night calls have become a creature of habit. At least they have for me, which means every Sunday night come 8:30 until however long it lasts, I'm doing the same thing every week. And it's become a pattern. And I totally believe in breaking patterns. And so I think what I may try to do is scatter these around at different times. Because I know that there's situations where I might have a boatload of info dumped on me on, say, Tuesday. And it's kind of hard to hold on to that or keep researching it and retain it until, the following Sunday, 5 days later. And it might be really good to, boom, let me jump on and blurt this out, put this out here. That way other people can look into it, see what they find, and see if they can expand or expound upon that topic. And so I think that'd be another good reason to break up the times that this is done. And, I might get a whim on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. to do this. I would say just kind of keep posted to Tactical Sovereignty in Facebook, for one, I guess would be a good idea. On second thought, what I should probably do is before I go and throw one out there, go and post something specifically to the group and say, hey, I'm coming on in an hour. We're going to talk about this or this. And That way, people that want to join or are interested in that topic can go and jump on like the live call. And then there might be times that it might be Friday night at midnight that I decide to do it, you know, because I try to go with things that I don't want to sound cliche, but are laid on my heart. Because I do believe that the creator, or whatever you want to call that entity, some people might call it the operating system, you know, whatever you want to look at it as. I think that there's certain things that are laid on my heart to discuss and talk about, and those are kind of what I try and follow with. And so that would also be a good reason to kind of break this up. And at the same time, it might be good to have, instead of just once a week, maybe have 2 or maybe sometimes 3 times a week something comes on. It might be 20 minutes long. It might be an hour and 20 minutes long. Who knows? We'll see. But that's just my view on that. So I guess since this is a group call, if anybody want to jump in and give their view on any of this, they can feel free to do so. I'm going to unmute everybody. So mute yourself back out if you don't want to be unmuted. And if you want to add to the subject matter, feel free to do so. I think I've got everybody unmuted. Yep, everybody's unmuted.
Brian, this is Kent. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Ken, how you doing? Good to hear from you.
Oh, okay, thank you. For people like myself who don't use Facebook, will you be noting this in any other method?
Well, I'll tell you what, and thanks for bringing that up, because I always forget to mention this to people. If you go to Talkshoe, if you go online I would say you can just probably punch in Talkshoe, Tactical Sovereignty, or Talkshoe Brian Parker, or you can put in Talkshoe 143321, and it will bring up the web page for this. And you can click follow on there. And if you click follow, then you'll get an email when one of these calls is scheduled. Because what I'll do is I'll go and schedule it. I might schedule it, I don't know, 5 hours ahead of time. I I promise I won't schedule it for any less than an hour ahead of time. So that way you can get an alert whenever I have one scheduled.
Can that work as a text instead of an email or not?
Yeah, it's on how you have it set up. I don't have any of the talk shoes set up for alerts, or some of them I follow. And I'm sure that since the company's been sold in the past couple of years, and they've been adding more and more things that you can do with the website, then they may have added, different choices on how you get notifications, whether it's over text or just only in an email. And at the same time, there's also different ways that you can get alerted on your emails as well that can be set up to where, it appears maybe on your home screen on your notifications, say, for instance, on a phone, for instance, So, yeah, I thought there's different avenues there, I believe.
Okay, and as far as Sunday night at 9 o'clock, then that will not necessarily be a time that you will be on any longer.
Right. That's not going to be a time that you can rest assured, we're going to be here, which I've kind of enjoyed over time. That way everybody knew it was going to be there. You know what I mean? Or they at least knew if it wasn't, able for them to, if they weren't able to attend or whatever, that the next day or a couple of days later, they could go back and listen to the recording over Talkshoe, or like I've been doing recently, is put them over YouTube as well. So that's a second avenue for people to review previous calls. So no, it's not going to be definitely every Sunday. Now, there may be times where I do decide to do a Sunday night one, a regular, maybe more of a regular Sunday night one, So first option, I would say, is Sunday night. Second option could be any time during the week.
Okay. And my other question is, thank you for that. My other question is, have you heard anything about Keith lately and how he's doing?
Keith's doing really well. He did a Facebook Live, I believe it was yesterday. He's sounding really healthy, looking really healthy, and I know that he's trying to hit this illness from every direction he can. So it's hard saying what really is working or what's not. But so far, I think the outlook looks really positive with him.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that.
Absolutely, Ken.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, thank everybody for being here. And what I'm doing with, not doing the regular every single Sunday, but maybe doing it at alternate times throughout the week and hopefully more than once a week is not going to be something that is going to slow this down or anything like that, but actually maybe help it expand or help it grow. It's just something I'm playing with, just an idea I'm messing with. And I would say at the same time, now I may not always remember to do this. So, like I said, number one, I will post to the group. And so people can see there that something is coming up. And at the same time, people can click the follow for um, these podcasts on Talkshoe, which will give them an alert. But I will also try to go and create a post to YouTube. People, I don't know if they know or not, but you can do a post to YouTube just kind of like you would to regular social media, whether it's just a picture or whatever the case may be. So I'll do that as well. And where I'll say, hey, at 8 o'clock tonight, or at noon today or noon tomorrow, so that will be another avenue of alerts for people also. And we'll see what happens. I think it can, probably be nothing other than beneficial, but just kind of change things up. And like I say, get out of being a creature of habit, because if we really want to break this simulacrum, if we really want to, at least in our life, break the simulation, the number one best way to do it is by not being a creature of habit. Thank you all. And like I tell you every week, and now maybe several times a week, you'll hear it. I tell everybody, if you really want to learn who you really are, learn where you're really from, and learn where you're really at. Because those have been the three biggest pieces of deception that's been put out there. And ask yourself the question, got sovereignty? It's there for everybody. You don't have to be at the other end of the leash. Although, unfortunately, some people are more comfortable there. Until we talk again, maybe in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, we'll see. Everybody, have a wonderful night. Thank you.